All right, we're going to try again. And we're going to
hear you now.
Okay, so where we were was Dina was clarifying. So the program that they're using is Spire, and it was 60 minutes. The program definition is 60 minutes a day, 5 days a week. So that's fidelity for the program. The school is insisting that they can only implement 30 minutes a day.
Understood. Using Spire and that's what's recommended. And she's asking how you negotiate that, or what do you do?
Yeah, she was, how do you reconcile that? You have this fidelity statement and the school's basic, in her case, the school's giving her half.
Understood. And I mean, first of all, kind of the same thing I said, just make sure it's in the deliberations that, what it says should be done for fidelity. And also if it says, I doubt it says this, but if it explains why in the handbook, that would be helpful. And that's what you want, get the prior written notice, all of those things. The problem is that if you're only getting a certain benefit, that it's out the program's recommendations for fidelity versus what is FAPE, what we're talking about. And because the argument on the other side is going to be, we're not going with their recommendations, but we are still providing FAPE. And so that's the argument you're going to have. And in order to figure that out, you have to basically have some and figure out what the difference is.
Your voice is fading out a little bit, by the way.
You can't hear me now?
Now I can.
Oh, okay. I probably just got quiet.
I know. Well, and you said something earlier, and from my point of view, what I argue is when I'm at the table, at least, is I'm like, if my son didn't have dyslexia, he would be performing here. So, but he happens to have dyslexia. Remediation is not a mythical unicorn that cannot be achieved. Full remediation is can happen, is perfectly expected by parents, is, it's not this intangible, unobtainable thing. So where I always am is I'm like pushing back going, if he didn't have dyslexia, he would be, reading at this level. You're not pushing him to that point. So therefore you're not providing him what he needs to be, what he should be having based on his ability.
And absolutely, I would push back. I guess I was the argument about the FAPE versus the implementation to fidelity. I would try to turn that around and use it kind of you did in your favor. And I was thinking another, because I know in Texas, at least in some districts, the dyslexia program seems to be by region. And so contacting, so perhaps if that's how, I don't know where this person is from.
She's in Georgia, actually.
Okay, so I don't know if they do regions like we do, but
I don't think so. I think we're the only weird ones that do that.
So it might, or I mean, even if they don't, it might be authorized by the region or something. The region might have some hand in it, and so contacting the region itself and asking to talk to the person who coordinates dyslexia, or who the teachers or whoever calls for questions about dyslexia, and getting the information there and letting them know what's going on, can provide you some more information, and put some more stuff in your arsenal. So when you go to the R meeting, you have that information. I've already contacted, I talked to so-and-so, this is what she said, here's the email that she wrote me. And because at least in Texas, sometimes these regions are very proud of the dyslexia programs that they support. And so knowing that, can you hear me? Sorry. And so, information regarding non-implementation and reporting that to them might be helpful to kind of light a fire.
Yeah, and she's saying, unfortunately, the person that kind of controlled it was in the IEP meeting, and she was refusing program fidelity.
The regional person or the
Yeah, their district person, whoever's in charge.
And who controlled it.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, again, and then you can also, you said Spire. I know that program. It's always helpful to have information on the program. I know a lot of these programs have websites that tell about their program and tell how awesome they are, and they have numbers. I've called different programs before and just kind of said I was a parent, which I am, and asked about, what happens if this happens? What happens if that happens? And if you kind of Pollyanna it, you would be surprised how much information you can get out of the providers of the actual program. So
I agree with that.
I do that. I'm a little sneaky, and you never know when they're going to give you a little tidbit that's going to be helpful.
Yeah.
That pertains to your kid.
Right. No, I have played stupid many times in a negotiation just to get somebody to say something that I
think that's how
like. Yeah, if you can act stupid long enough, you can usually lure them into something because they're like, oh, she's so stupid, she's not going to understand it even if I say it. And then they say it, and I'm like, gotcha.
I am very playing to people's egos is helpful, and so I'll call that, say it's Squire or Spire, whatever. I'm sorry, Spire,
Yeah.
And to just ask about the program. They've got people who are just there to answer your questions, and have get them to send you stuff like, so why should it be an hour a day? How does that make sense? And don't tell them you're fighting with the school over it, but just they'll give you something maybe.
So here's another question. How do you get FAPE and if we already did this one, remind me, but I don't think we did. How do you get FAPE when a child is medically diagnosed with a learning disability and the school declares it's only a mild restriction of performing a major life activity? Therefore, the student is not identified with a disability under 504 or IDEA.
Okay. This happens a lot. Mostly, I see this a lot with autism and specific learning disabilities. I'm sure there are others. Those are the ones I see it the most with, where a parent goes to an outside person and gets this diagnosis. For learning disabilities, a lot of the time you're going to be using some sort of, I guess it'd be an LSSP or school psychologist that has at least the credentials that the school psychologist at the school has. So they will go through and do more of an educational assessment. Autism is a little different. So let's talk about both of them first of all. So of course, this the medical diagnostic criteria, say in the DSM or whatever, is different than the educational diagnostic criteria. It's not even really diagnostic. So there are different things at play, and a lot of times I have this, especially with autism. The parent got an autism diagnosis at 3 years old, and the school is saying no. And the reason for that is because for the educational criteria to be met, the child has to have the disability. Okay, we got that, and also has to be in need of those services to be a child with the disability. And we have that with the specific learning disability as well. But on top of that, with the specific learning disability, there's an IQ test as part of the evaluation, and there are different measures for different portions or whatever of the IQ, crystallized intelligence, working memory, long-term, short-term memory. And so you have a student, first of all, a student has to have average IQ for, specific learning disability to be a maybe. And then you have usually it's the KTEA, just some sort of test, let's say reading, he's really low in reading or she. And then you have to have these other criteria under the IQ be met. So whichever criteria, that's the crystallized intelligence, working memory, whichever one lines up with that specific learning disability, they have to match up. So let's say, and this isn't right because I don't remember all of them, let's say low processing, some processing speed, is correlated with a learning disability in math, and those line up, then the kid would be diagnosed, or by the school, it would be recommended that he has a learning disability in math. But if those don't line up and there's not a deficit in that processing speed or whatever it is, then he's not going to be recommended by the school to meet that criteria. Okay, that was really long. And so if you want to ask me to like repeat anything or slow down, I can. Yeah, that was a lot.
So I can give you an example. So I know one family who their daughter did not qualify for an IEP,
Okay.
according to the school evaluation. They did put the child on a 504, and the district did start doing evaluations, or sorry, in-school remediation, right? However, the child started significantly regressing.
Okay.
So progress wasn't being made. The child is falling further and further behind, because you can't stop time. Time keeps moving forward. Grades keep progressing, right? The child is now more than a year and a half behind. By balanced literacy scales, the child should have been labeled at significant risk a year and a half ago. But yet they were denied the IEP. We met with the diagnosticians attempting to restart the process, and the diagnostician was like, I'm not expecting anything different this round. And it was like, but you have a child that's regressing further and further behind, and you think that your evaluation didn't show any strengths and weaknesses, it only showed strengths, but the child is significantly struggling. How can you justify what's going on here?
And so what the diagnostician is saying is that, we did that IQ test, and whatever points of intelligence we tested, the processing speed, working memory, whatever it was, everything was labeled as a strength. And so there were no deficits in those areas to correlate with a specific learning disability. And those aren't going to change. Is that what she was saying?
Basically, yes. And they did acknowledge that she had dyslexia, but not that she had an SLD.
Okay. And there's, back and forth, like, is dyslexia an SLD? Is it not an SLD? And there was a case in Copper's Cove recently where the court came, or it was the district court came down and said that it should be an SLD. And then at some point, after I talked to you, it got appealed. So it's in appeals right now. And it makes sense that there would be a lack of correlation for dyslexia. And I think that is something we are going to be seeing more and more and more of. We'll see how this Copper's Cove case comes down. I would suggest, you've got this FIE. I don't know how old it is. It sounds like it's about more than a year old. And, you asked for another evaluation. They refused it. You need prior written notice for that, by the way, that refusal, that. And if I would ask for an IEE, a lot of times if I use more than a year old, they're going to definitely fight back on that. But I would ask for that, and so you can get an outside opinion on it. Because she says it's not going to change. Then guess what? She's right. It's not going to change. And that doesn't mean that it's just not going to change. her report is not going to change, probably. I doubt it. So getting another person to do, to make sure she was right is definitely something I would do.
Okay. So we had a couple more questions for you, and I know that we want to get to an additional topic too. So our private parochial schools required or even suggested to help pay for tutoring for dyslexia dyscalculia. My son has been at this school for 3 years and has continually fallen behind without teachers reaching out to us. We finally have a diagnosis, but is the school partially or mostly responsible for letting my son, who continually fell behind, and they didn't offer interventions until I said that we've had enough and insisted on an IEP?
Okay. So we're talking about a private parochial school. So I'm assuming, big assumption, that the school does not receive federal funds, because generally private, elementary schools and secondary schools don't receive private funds, which means that they are not subject to the IDEA. So you don't get those protections. However, you do get protections under the ADA, and not as many, of course, but there are certain accommodations that the kids can get when they're diagnosed with a disability. As far as services, from what I don't deal a lot with private schools, but I seem to remember the law saying something to the effect of they can provide them, but if they don't, they have to allow the parent to pay for it. And I'm not sure of the ins and outs of that, but they can't just kick you out basically, or they usually can't. But again, we're assuming that this school doesn't receive private funds, and um, a recent pickup is we are in this pandemic situation, and the federal government has issued I think it's $13 billion for elementary and secondary schools, and other funding for higher education to be split between the states and allocated in a very confusing manner. And some of that money, and I did a bunch of research on this, obviously, so I found this out recently, is being allocated for private schools. And I think that the private school can choose to take it or not. And I'm not sure exactly how that's going to play out with respect to federal funding and being subject to the IDEA. But I will bet you that there will be a lot of attorneys like me who will argue that it does subject these private schools to the IDEA. So I am curious to see how that goes. And it's a very different situation. So
I know that. So we were originally in private school here in the greater Houston area. When we suspected dyslexia, they received no federal funds. When we started to suspect dyslexia, we were told there were numerous dyslexic children at the school, and we were allowed to bring in a tutor during the day to work with him specifically on his dyslexia. But beyond allowing me to bring in a tutor during the day, they were not going to do anything at all.
And that's generally what you're going to get, again, unless they are getting funds from the federal government, which it's generally unlikely, but maybe we'll see more of it. Some of them do. And institutions of higher education are totally different. You make arguments based on financial aid. So. But yeah, that seems like generally what you're going to get.
Yeah. So what is FAPE for specific learning disability?
For SpEd 8. That's really broad. I'm going to go back to what isn't FAPE, and
Right.
And again, the courts have focused on progress. What kind of progress is being made? What kinds of services are needed for to educate the student with the specific learning disability, and also there are the LRE requirements, least restrictive environment, things like that definitely go into determining whether the child is getting FAPE. So it's very broad. I think we're probably talking more about what services should be provided, and that is going to be an ARD committee decision, and it's going to be supposed to be individualized based on the child, what the child needs, and so again, it's extremely subjective, and it comes down to what a hearing officer says FAPE is if you go to due process, which I know most people don't want to have to do. So again, I would look at progress reports, and that's going to be the main telltale sign of whether your child is getting FAPE. The services are great, but you can't really focus on what services make FAPE. You have to look at the progress, and if there's not progress, then maybe there needs to be some more services to make FAPE. And so it's all very interrelated. But that's where I would go to see the progress side.
So we had a question from Cheryl. Can the school ignore the IEE provider's recommendation for placement, regular ed with support and accommodations? But school says no, and they offer SDC, which I asked what that was, and she said special day class. I'm wondering if that's
an LR.
Resource room?
Resource or a functional skills, life skills type, depending on how old the kid is. Okay, so for an IEE, no, they can't ignore it. But it's not much better than that. Sorry, but they have to consider it. And so then you get into what does consider mean? Did the school say blatantly, I'm ignoring this and I'm not taking this into account? Was it talked about? And really look at, was it considered? Did the school consider this? Did the art committee have these discussions about it? And if you go through the art meeting and they are refusing to look at it and talk about it, then about it, ask for something to be put into deliberations. The main thing is to just document those things, because if it's not documented, it's great to say something happened, but if it's not documented, your chance of proving that something happened are so yeah.
So we did kind of want to switch subjects based on something that just came up, which is now I'm looking for the actual letter itself.
I'm gonna pull it up as well because I want to. Oh, it's up already, I think. Okay.
Right. So, okay.
All right.
And I'm getting old, so my font is a little bit too small. A letter was sent on May 27th to Mitch McConnell, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, and Kevin McCarthy from AASA, the School Superintendents Association, the Association of School Business Officials International, the Council of Administration of Special Education, the National Association of State Directors of Special Education, the National Association of School Psychologists, and the National School Boards Association. So this is one letter sent by these groups together. It's not even that long of a letter. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's 6 paragraphs long. Mm-hmm. This is some of the most convoluted language I've ever read. And I'm not a lawyer like you, but I've spent my entire life dealing with legal contracts and negotiations, and I'm pretty good at the language. And I know the first time I read it, I was like, wait a minute, what did I just read? I'm very confused.
There's so many other things that go into this letter that aren't stated, just by way of explanation. Do you want me to tell you do you want me to talk about the letter or just generally?
Yeah, try to summarize the letter real quick what is the letter trying to ask for?
Okay, so let me set it up first. I'm gonna try to do this without talking forever. Under federal law, the Code of Federal Regulations, the states have a requirement that, and this is related to IDEA Part B funds, and that's just a class of funds that the federal government gives to the states. The states actually, it's a sub-grant. The states have to apply for it, and the federal government gives them the grant so long as they are providing FAPE to all of their students. There's a requirement for states, and it basically says you have to whatever your level of spending is on special education, the following year, it has to be that much or more. You can't reduce your spending. Or if you do, then you have to give the federal government back the amount of the shortfall up to the amount of the Plan B funds that the federal government gave you.
So in other words, if you say you're going to spend $100,000, so you get $100,000, but you only spend 80, you have to return 20,000.
I don't know that the federal government funds. I don't think they match up with the amount that you spent. I'm sure there's some way to do it. Maybe they do, but it doesn't appear that they have to match up. But let's just say the federal government gives you $10,000, and you say you're going to spend, $100,000, like you said, and you only spend $90,000. Then you would have to give them their $10,000 back.
Okay.
However, if you only spent 80 and your shortfall was 20%, you would still only have to give them their $10,000 back. So it's up to the amount that they gave you under Plan B.
Okay.
Now, there are exceptions for this, like what, funds go into it. The Secretary of Education can provide a waiver to the states. And there are a lot of procedural safeguards that go into that. There has to be evidence. There has to be a hearing. It's a very high, clear, and convincing standard that the states are still going to be able to provide FAPE. A lot of things go into that. So just to kind of start off, that's what the state requirement is. Now, they also have a local school district requirement that is similar. There are differences in the way it's calculated, and I don't think I need to get into that, but it is somewhat similar. However, there's no waiver. And it doesn't say that the Secretary of Education can waive this requirement, this spending, successive year spending requirement, like if she can waive it for the states. Along with that, I mentioned that the states have that ability to apply for the waiver, and local school districts do not. But in the state, the law pertaining to the state waiver has all the procedural safeguards. It's a very long list of evidence they have to give the secretary, and then they get people from the public can come and testify about are they getting FAPE? Can the state give FAPE? Are they going to be able to? And then they make a decision on it. And again, it's a clear and convincing standard, which is a really high standard of proof that the state has to meet. So then you come over to this local rule that's somewhat similar, that doesn't have any of this waiver, but it also doesn't include all these procedural safeguards, the hearing, the standard. There's another part in there, in the one pertaining to the states, where if you have a shortfall 1 year, let's say you're $10,000 under 1 year, the next year you don't get to just beat the lower number. You go back to the number you should have had. So you were supposed to spend, $20,000. You only spent 10. The following year, you don't get to spend, $11,000. You have to spend at least 20 still. You were supposed to spend 20. So even if there's a waiver, and again, none of this is in those local requirements. And I'm trying to not make this confusing. Sorry. Right. And so basically what this letter is doing is it's saying, hey, you've got, Secretary of Education. She can give waivers for the states, and that's great. And
but she said she wouldn't.
Yeah, we saw those waivers. And so, but she can't give waivers for the local education agencies, like the districts. And so we want those. And that's basically it. They want a waiver that's not, because it says specifically in the letter that there's not a waiver for local school districts like there is for the state, which we don't have. And so that's what it's asking. And it's problematic for a number of reasons. For me, it's problematic because I live in Texas, and we just had a lawsuit, or the federal government just had won a lawsuit against the state of Texas where they had a shortfall, and basically the state of Texas said, no, it's not really a shortfall because our the amount we need to spend to provide FAPE just went down. And is it true? We just had the whole 8.5 thing. Yeah. And the Fifth Circuit basically said, no, that's not the way this works. It's a monetary amount. You don't get to.
Yeah. And Texas owes like $233 million or something back to the federal government.
I know that this one case was 33 million. I don't know about like other things, but this was, hey, you owe the federal government 33 million in Part B funds. And so
right, but that was just like the first like payment that they had to do, like out of the big like
really?
whopping sum or something.
I'm sure. I mean, it's so all by way of saying that this waiver thing kind of bothers me on a big level, but especially for Texas, and I'm sure this has happened in other states, since we just had this whole thing where Texas got popped for this, and now we're going to give them a waiver for the same thing, or a little bit, I guess.
Right.
And so being able to, and there's no procedural safeguards, like what they're writing this letter asking for it. Well, what needs to happen before a waiver is granted that's not provided for?
Right.
So yeah, a lot of unknowns.
Yeah, it was $277 million in fines.
God. Yeah.
So the way that I read the letter was that all of these superintendents or districts, or however you want to classify it, were saying that special education staff was reallocated for other things.
Yes, there's that too.
So, again, let's use our $100,000 because it's a nice, even, round, divisible number. So, a district has $100,000 in funding, and, 10,000 of it was for this staff, and 10,000 of it was for this service directly related to special education, and 10,000 of it was related to this other service. Mm-hmm. But because COVID happened, staff were reallocated, certain services weren't supposed to go away, but they did go away. And, basically they were going to spend $100,000 if the school year hadn't ended the way that the school year did. But instead of spending $100,000, they only spent $70,000 of what they were given. Mm-hmm. And they spent that $30,000 when they reallocated everything on other COVID related things. And they want to be neither fined nor penalized. So they don't want to have to pay it back, and they want the same same amount of money year after year.
And I guess I should have, I'm not sure if I specifically stated this, with respect to those laws that we're talking about, the expenditures they have to make related to special education services. I should have nailed that down a little bit better. And I'm going to pull something up. So let me show you just real quick. I wanted to look, there was something I did see. And so in March of 2020, because there's been a lot of guidance that's come out related to COVID and everything. And the DOE, the Department of Education, specifically said, earlier this year, they identified what the Part B funds could be used for. And this isn't talking about the state expenditures and things, but they specifically identified activities that directly relate to providing and ensuring the continuity of SpEd services, dissemination of health information for children with disabilities. So it all has to relate, it might be because of COVID, but it still has to relate to children with disabilities, helping them, helping educate them. So, and yeah, federal government has said several times, like, we still have to do all these things, and yet we are persistent. So they are persistent.
Yeah, it was just this amazingly convoluted letter, and myself and a couple of others read it, and we had this conversation string going on. It's like, did I read that correctly?
And I'm thinking that one of the reasons it's convoluted could be because there's absolutely no law that allows for a waiver.
Right.
Which there's really nothing, not a lot of legal stuff to put in there, no case law, nothing like that, because there's no waiver. Right. And I don't know if it's going to happen. I hope it doesn't. But and I understand we've got a lot going on, and some flexibility for schools and kind of understanding. I'm definitely not saying that it's not hard and that we shouldn't be flexible. That's not. But providing this just kind of this flexibility without any limits or something like that, and I don't know what that would look like. Yeah, the letter itself frightens me. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, and I can't remember, you may remember what state it is. I think it's up east, where a group of parents have filed a class action lawsuit against their school district, or maybe it's even against their whole state education agency, because their autistic children have been denied services to such a degree that their children are significantly regressing.
Mm-hmm.
And they're going, you weren't given a waiver. You can't just automatically deny our children what they're legally entitled to, and you have, and our children are suffering as a result.
Yeah, I think they did a similar one for children with dyslexia too, didn't they? In like New York, something. It was.
I'm not sure.
What these states.
One thing that we have said here significantly at DI is, yes, we need to give grace. Yes, we need to have understanding. Nobody's prepared for this. But that doesn't mean that our children should be denied their educational access. If general education curriculums are going to continue to build upon subjects and advance and progress and do all the things that they're supposed to do, then so should dyslexia intervention and remediation. That doesn't mean reviewing old material. That means continuing to provide new material. That means continuing to support our children the way that they need to be supported.
Yeah, and I think several groups have come out and said, these funds should be allocated to help the children who are going to suffer the most, the children who need it the most. And the children who need it the most, some of the one set of those children is our children with disabilities. And that I understand flexibility like you do, but not at the expense of our most vulnerable, in my opinion, most vulnerable population.
Right.
Yeah.
Definitely. So is there any last thoughts on the letter that you want to share?
I have so many thoughts. I probably shouldn't say them. Let me look briefly at the letter again, just so I can see if I have any last thoughts.
Well, any reference to Texas education? No, never mind. That was the Fifth Circuit Court. Sorry, I'm reading the wrong headline.
Yeah. The notes, yeah. No, I mean, I think we covered it, and you definitely hit on the moving money around, and hopefully the federal government will provide some more relief, a lot more relief. I think they asked for between higher and lower education of 50 billion or 70 or something, and didn't get nearly what they asked for. And so, I know the schools are hurting. I know they need the money, and totally get it. But I also know that our most vulnerable population, our kids with disabilities, are hurting as well, and they need their services. So we can't just forget about them.
Okay. Any final thoughts on our original topic, FAPE, before we end as well?
Yeah, just if you don't mind, briefly, just kind of wanted to touch on, actually made I'm not going to, I'll send it to you if you want it, but a demonstrative, I'm kind of a geek, exhibit to kind of just put together, the different elements of the IEP, because we have it seems like we got a lot of questions on, how do we argue FAPE if this is happening? How do we argue FAPE if this is happening? And so I wanted to focus just real briefly on the nature of the IEP as this holistic document that's interrelated, and one section depends on the other, and you can't just take one section out. You can't just have the goals. You can't have this. So, and I think, we start with the PLAF statement, which is where you are. And I definitely think that gets disregarded sometimes because it's boring. And then we, from there we go to the goals, and everywhere the PLAF statement shows a need, we have goals. And there, based on the goals, we determine the services. What are the appropriate services to meet the goals? And then we get to the progress reports, which filters back into, guess what we looked at for the next class? The progress reports. And so it just kind of goes around and around and around. So just wanted to emphasize that interrelated nature of the whole thing, that it all hinges on all the parts being appropriate. You can't have really bad class and get really good goals. You can't have really bad goals and get the right services.
Yeah.
It doesn't work, shouldn't work. So, yeah.
And that's a really important distinction, because I think, we as a community focus so much on writing a good goal. But you're absolutely right. I mean, if your PLAF statement's like, the kid's doing great, can't get goals.
Yeah, goals for every need. And then, and around and around and around. Then you also have transition plan, which comes later for me and some other parents. So,
yeah.
But, yeah, that was all I was going to say.
Okay. Well, thank you for joining us. I'm sorry to our audience that we've had technical issues and we had to stop and restore. It will make, so I think I'm going to have to do a post where I, have both videos on it at the same time so people can know that they're together, but we'll fix them. But thanks again for joining us, Holly. I look forward to the Andrew conversation that we're going to have in August.
I do too. I think that should be fun, and kind of look at some of those cases that came down afterwards.
Yeah, but for the most part, we usually sign off for summer. So this is our last, at this moment, planned session for the summer. But COVID has created a new world for us, and we kind of don't know what to expect. We don't plan on broadcasting anything necessarily, but that doesn't mean that we're not here, because we are absolutely here. And, if y'all have needs, ideas, questions, etc., just flag them and we will address them. And if some major league topic comes up, then I'll reach out to Holly and go, hey, do you have time?
I always have time.
But otherwise, everybody have a great summer, and we will pick up with the videos that we're sharing in the fall.
Bye.
Bye.